I just started the recording again. So thank you so much, Paolo, for your presence. The floor is yours, 60 to 75 minutes, followed by 45 to 60 minutes of discussion with those present. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Sina, for inviting me. The pleasure and the honor is mine, especially because you've been organizing this wonderful series of seminar with great scholars. So I'm a little bit humble, and I would like to live up to your expectation. And thanks for your marvelous presentation. In the abstract that I gave you, that you made it circulate, I made a reference to this title, Bloody Battles, and with the subtitle, Blood Donation versus Blood Market. Now, I made a mistake, but it was a fruitful mistake, because I forgot to add a very big question mark at the very end of the subtitle. And the question mark explains, hope so, explains, I would say, synthetically, the big issue at stake. Because one thing is to say blood donation versus blood market, and one thing is to question that very dichotomy, that is donation versus market, gift versus exchange, and so forth. So I would also like to add an exclamation point that is in the double meaning of, I would say, it's a wonderful topic, of course, but at the same time, it's also an alert not to dichotomize this donation versus market, gift versus exchange. And much of what I would like to tell you today, based on Richard Titmuss' book, is about this story of this dichotomy. So the reason why I think this book, The Gift of Relationship by Richard Titmuss, with the subtitle From Human Blood to Social Policy, is extremely interesting, is because it has been widely acknowledged as a form of, as the precursor of what today is mainly known as the moral limits of markets debates. So all the scholars that you see here in the books featured in these slides have felt the need to address Richard Titmuss' book. Even though, I mean, it is, I would say, one of the most cited authors in this kind of debate, but the book raises lots of conceptual, I would say, challenge. It's, in a sense, disseminated by conceptual minds that we need to address in order to disentangle lots of ambiguities that in these moral limits of market debates are still persistent and still going on, and creates lots of misunderstanding, I would say. Now, most of these books are very known, but let's try to say, I mean, I would say, let's try to come back to the origin of the debate, that is Richard Titmuss, that framed many of the arguments that are usually recalled or reused or reinterpreted in this debate. You might think that that book, that can be traced back to the 70s, 1970s, can be a little bit old, but in a sense, we are still there. If you think about this kind of debate recently, at the end of last year, launched at the European level, the title of this newspaper news is Blood Money, Europe Wrestles with a Moral Dilemma Over Paying Donors for Plasma. So we are discussing whether we should, for example, introduce or make it possible to be paid if we give our blood as, I would say, an act of donation, as a donation. So should we be paid to give our blood? Because on average, I would say more or less everywhere, with some exceptions, many countries forbid the possibility of being paid to give the blood. So the question is not so old in some sense, so we are still debating this. So it's a very topical issue as well. So it's not only an issue that relates to the philosophical debates over the moral limits of market, but it's still a very actual, I would say, and a topical issue. Now, what do we talk about when we talk about the book by Titmuss? Sorry, because the slides doesn't go. What's going on? Okay. Let me first tell you the structure of the presentation, and then I will go into the detail. I've decided to structure the presentation into 4 or 5 steps, depending on whether you count the prologue and the epilogue. But the prologue is about the main assumptions of the gift relationship. Then the Act 1 is about the gift. Act 2 is about corruption. Act 3, it's a sort of an excursus that deals with an institutionalized gift as a big problem that is a sort of a post-Titmuss debate. And to conclude with an epilogue, I will try to provide you with some final reflection about the gift corruption in a good bad polity. Okay, let me start with the prologue and the main assumption of this famous book that was even celebrated by the New York Times as one of the 10 best books of that year. I will tell you 4 or 5 key assumptions that are useful, especially for the epilogue, for the conclusion, but it's important to keep them as a sort of background of this debate, because it's the way in which Richard Titmuss tries to frame the problem of the gift versus exchange, and in particular, the donation of blood versus the market for blood. So at the very beginning of the book, he claims that that book is an attempt to distinguish the social from the economic in public policies and in those institutions and services with declared welfare goals. Now, you can first notice here this very big distinction between the social on the one hand and the economic. I will tell you a little bit more about that when I will try to reframe Titmuss' argument in terms of the ideological argument. The second big assumption that I will leave a little bit on the background, because it has been widely explored, is that Titmuss had this kind of socialist communitarian stance. So much of his book was an attempt to defend the welfare state, and Titmuss is also famous as being one of the main advocate of the welfare state. He helped the UK administration to create the welfare state. So he was a key element in the story of the UK welfare state. But this kind of socialist communitarian defense of welfare state is also part of the problem of the way in which he tried to frame the problem of the gift relationship. While the first 2 points are more, I would say, on the background, the last and the third point is about the contingent issue from which the book, in a sense, arose. Because in 1978, 2 very famous, at least those time, 2 famous economists like Cooper and Collier wrote a paper entitled "The Price of Blood: An Economic Study of the Charitable and Commercial Principle." And they were trying to provide reasons to introduce a blood market in the UK. Now, you should know that in the UK, as in many other countries, the gift giving of blood is, as the word say, is a system for free, I would say. So people are expected to give the blood for free. So if you are trying to introduce a market for blood, that for Titmuss was a big challenge. So 2 years later, Titmuss tried to reply to them with this book, The Gift Relationship. He didn't want, of course, the introduction of a blood market. So much of his book is an attempt to defend the national healthcare system of the UK, and therefore also the welfare state, against this kind of attempt to introduce a blood market. There are also 2 further assumptions, I would say. As I told you at the beginning, this is an attempt by Titmuss to try to provide a sort of comparative study between the USA system, that is mainly a blood for sale system, and the UK system, that is a gift-giving blood system. So it's a comparative study between these 2 big systems. And much of what Titmuss does in that book is an attempt to provide arguments in terms of the economic and moral superiority of system 1 over system 2. The moral superiority of gift-giving blood system over the blood for sale system. Now let's have a look at a glance, I would say, of the main moral arguments provided by Titmuss. There are many indeed, so I've been trying here to sum them up, or to reframe, in a sense, the most famous one that are still in the moral limit of market debate. But the first one is extremely important, which I will tell you why in a second. The first one is the ideological argument. The second one is, I would say, the most problematic argument that has been attacked by Kenneth Arrow. Famously, Kenneth Arrow wrote a very famous review in the same year when he took the Nobel Prize in economics, 1974, if I'm not wrong. And that is the altruism freedom argument that is really problematic. So I will skip this argument, because I totally agree with Arrow, at least in this regard, even though there are some troubles even with Arrow's claims. The third moral argument has to do with perhaps one of the most famous arguments provided by Titmuss, that is the fairness exploitation argument. And the fourth, that is the more, I would say, one of the most intriguing argument, that is his attempt to preserve opportunities for altruism, that sometimes it is associated with the so-called domino effect argument. And it is intriguing also because it is highly entangled with other arguments like the corruption argument, the commodification argument, the degradation argument, and many other similar but different arguments. And the last one is also the crowding out argument. So as you might, at least for those of you who are familiar with the so-called moral limits of market debate, here in this book, you will already find the main arguments that have been framed so far, I would say, not the last ones, such as the semiotic objection to the market and more recent, I would say, argument, but the main arguments are still there in that book, The Gift Relationship. Okay, now there is the very last assumption, and then I will enter into the discussion of these arguments. I think this is the most important assumption in many respects, at least as far as my research interests are concerned. And it is the anthropological institutional assumption. And it is very well crafted by Titmuss in this sentence that I will read together with you. And he claims something like, this study is about the role of altruism in modern society, hence its title. It attempts to fuse the politics of welfare and the morality of individual wills. Men are not born to give. As newcomers, they face none of the dilemmas of altruism and self-love. How can they and how do they learn to give? And the conclusion provided by Titmuss is that the ways in which society organizes and structures its social institutions can encourage or discourage the altruistic in man. Therefore, you can already anticipate that the introduction of market as a specific institution, according to Titmuss, may discourage the altruistic in man. So the conclusion for Titmuss is that institution can and must play a major role in the perfecting of human nature. Now, this kind of anthropological assumption is in many respects Rousseauian-like assumption, I would say. And the very last conclusion by Titmuss is that we need socialist social policy, because he's convinced that the socialist social policies as a specific institution can help, can foster, can nurture altruism in man. Okay, let's keep now this anthropological institutional assumption in the background. I will come back on this at the very end of my presentation, but I repeat, keep it in mind because it is extremely important as an anthropological assumption, and in many respects deflect much of Richard Titmuss' claims. As I said at the beginning, there is this kind of socialist communitarian stance that is a little bit problematic in the way in which he frames his argument and destroys some of the most important arguments that he tries to put forward. Okay, the very last assumption, and then I conclude with this first part, is about what he calls the big unanswered questions. And this is, I would say, to the credit of Titmuss' intellectual honesty. He was very well aware, if you read carefully the introduction, he was very well aware that much of the issues he raised in that book were very big issues that he couldn't deal. He was a sociologist, he was not a philosopher, but he realizes that there are big questions that he couldn't address. And he says this study has ended up raising fundamental issues posed by philosophers for centuries. And one of these is, why give to strangers? Who is my stranger in the relatively affluent, acquisitive, and divisive society of the 20th century? What are the connections then, if obligations are extended, between the reciprocals of giving and receiving in modern welfare systems? Now, I've used this kind of image of the Good Samaritan parable, the bottom of the page, because the question, why give to strangers, is very similar to who is my neighbor. Even though it doesn't frame the question in that way, you might start at least to understand what is at stake in the giving of blood, because the giving of blood is a gift to stranger. And Titmuss insists a lot on this. And as a gift to stranger, raises big questions like these ones. Why should I feel a kind of bond with a stranger that I don't even know? So Titmuss, behind the story of the gift giving of blood, sees the possibility of reading a sort of social bond, even though he misses the point, as I will tell you later. Okay, now let's first move to the Act 1, the gift. As I told you, there is the big ideological argument that creates lots of trouble in Titmuss' way of reasoning. And on the one hand, it is because it is a very general, perhaps too general argument. And I would say also against a very general, or again, too general understanding of what is commodification. The commodification of blood, it was against the commodification of blood and its dangerous effects, but the way in which he frames this argument is really problematic. Let's read together this passage that is really revealing of this kind of ideological argument. He wrote, all policy would become in the end economic policy, and the only values that would count would be those that could be measured in terms of money. Each individual would act egoistically for the good of all by selling his blood for what the market would pay. To abolish the moral choice of giving to strangers could lead to an ideology to end all ideology. So he's really worried about the market ideology. We will see why this is a little bit problematic. And then he also had, this study is concerned with the values we accord to people for what they give to strangers, not for what they get out of society. So individualistic private markets may colonize any sector of welfare state and policy. So many scholars have also seen in this kind of passages one of the very forerunner, I would say, of the imperialism, market imperialism in some respect, but not in epistemological sense, in the sense of the imperialism of economic science, but the imperialistic attitude of the market that may tend to colonize other spheres of life that should not be for the market, should not be colonized, should be preserved from the attack or the colonization of the market. The reason why I believe that this kind of ideological argument is really problematic is because Titmuss tries to frame the argument in terms of, as I told you at the beginning, the social versus the economic. And when he talks about the gift, and this is a very telling and revealing passage, the grant or the gift or unilateral transfer, whether it takes the form of cash, time, energy, satisfaction, blood, or even life itself, is the distinguishing mark of the social, just as exchange or bilateral transfer is a mark of the economic. And I created this kind of table to show you why in the book you will find this kind of dichotomic way of thinking, black and white thinking. So you will find the gift social on the one hand and exchange economic on the other. And in the list of the key concept that you will find in the book, there is this kind of assumption like there is the non-market sphere and the market sphere. And in the non-market sphere, you can find the state, society, altruism, gratuity, Gemeinschaft, or freedom. And in the market, or what Titmuss classifies within this column, you will find, of course, the market, but also the individual, the egoism, interest, Gesellschaft, coercion even. So it's extremely important to understand that what Titmuss is trying to do when he talks about the gift giving of blood is trying to isolate what he perceives to be a kind of very pure gift. Why it is pure and why I need to think about the purity of the gift? Because precisely because he wants to isolate the market from the non-market, he needs to think something like there must be something that is belonging to the non-market, and the gift giving of blood is truly emblematic for the very simple reason that being a gift to strangers, you cannot expect anything in return. So you see now why the gift of blood is symbolized by Titmuss in a way that he really wants to preserve something from the colonization of markets. Conceiving the gift as a poor gift and conceiving the poor gift through the gift giving of blood, Titmuss is trying to say something like there is something that is really poor, is not an exchange, and this is the gift of blood. So if we destroy the gift of blood, maybe we destroy the sense of communitarian ties that on which any society is based, especially because it is a gift to strangers. So Titmuss is not talking about, at least apparently, the Gesellschaft. Is trying to talk about the Gemeinschaft and the way in which the Gesellschaft may colonize the Gemeinschaft. So he wants once more to preserve gratuity, altruism, or altruism from egoism, gratuity from interest, and so forth. So he's trying to set up, to use Margaret Radin metaphor, a wall. He wants to set up a wall between these two spheres. But this is a truly dichotomic way of thinking, full of troubles. Now, it's easy to counter-object to Titmuss that this way of thinking is a sort of a Manichaean bipolarism, as one of his scholars, Reisman, wrote, because Titmuss never accepted, for example, that the market could complement welfare and need not be its enemy. There is, as I said in another paper, for those of you who are interested, I can send you the paper, or Sina, if you wish, you can insert a link in the presentation or after the recording. Part of this presentation, it is based on an old paper of mine, well, not so old, 2019 paper. As I claim, Titmuss falls in this kind of trap of the ideology of anti-ideology. And this is a typical dichotomy fallacy. Because if he wants to combat an ideology like the ideology of the market by simply counterposing another type of ideology, it doesn't work. It cannot be a good way of reasoning. It's simply a game of oppositions between two different kinds of ideology. Also, as many scholars has noticed, especially Mary Douglas, the famous anthropologist, she even in a review of that book, she wrote something like, even the title of Titmuss' book is misguiding, because it talks about the gift relationship, but by insisting so much on the impersonality of the pure gift, Titmuss cuts out one thing that is proper, usually proper, of the gift relationship. You need to have a relation to cultivate this kind of gift-giving relationship. So if you think about the giving of blood in terms of I'm giving my blood to a stranger, okay, that's fine. It's a gift, you might say, but then you are, in a sense, putting aside all this kind of flourishing type of relationships, like any sort of friendship relationship, love relationship that are based on gift and gift giving. So insisting so much on the impersonality of the poor gift might be a little bit misleading. Also, as Kenneth Arrow noticed, why do you have to insist so much on the impersonality of the pure gift? Because that impersonality is typical of the market transactions on average, at least in the big society. Now, if you get a big society and this kind of transactions are impersonal, Arrow said, so what is the distinguishing mark of this gift relationship if you are talking the same language of market transactions? So the conception of impersonal altruism, as Arrow said, is as far removed from the feelings of personal interaction as any marketplace. So Arrow is claiming something like, I don't see the point of insisting so much on the impersonality of the pure gift. Now, let me go to the third and perhaps most famous argument, besides the corruption argument that I will address later, that is the fairness exploitation argument. It can be simply framed in this term, derived from Titmuss' book, paid donor systems are unjust and exploitative. There is another famous passage of the book, the commercialization of blood results in situations in which proportionately more blood is supplied by the poor, the unskilled, and the unemployed, the Negroes, sorry, that was Titmuss' way of writing, and other low-income groups and categories of exploited human populations of high blood yielders. So redistribution in terms of blood and blood products from the poor to the rich appears to be one of the dominant effects of the American blood banking system. So it was, I repeat, trying to provide this kind of comparative study between the USA and the UK system. And then when he tried to understand the USA system, he noticed that there were lots of poor people, unskilled people who were giving the blood. So that was the way in which Titmuss tried to frame this exploitation argument. Now, it is an important argument. It is very important, I would say, but it is not a categorical argument. It's not a definitive argument. It can be easily addressed in some way. But before addressing the problem, I think we should ask these two kind of questions. The first one is, do we make paid donors better off if we ban the market for blood? Because if we ban the market for blood, we deprive them from an opportunity to make money, you might say. So we might even make them worse off. And the second question is, shouldn't we, and this is, I would say, the most important question, shouldn't we improve the conditions of those who are worse off? Because of course, if the problem is that they are poor, we need to improve their situation rather than trying to abolish the market for blood, for example. If this, I repeat, is the problem. So there's no need to ban the market for blood. I might claim you might want to, for example, help those in need to get out of that situation that is exploitative. So it's a situation in some respect that is problematic, not the introduction of the market for blood, I would say. So you need to solve the situation, the background condition from which they are giving their blood, rather than abolishing the market for blood. And of course, there is another big question, that is whether this kind of argument is always and necessarily true. I think that most of the time, it is a contingent argument, which means that it can also be an empirical claim. And if it is an empirical claim, we need to look at the data to see whether these exploitative situations are true or not. Now, if we look at the data, it seems that many countries that were relying on the market for blood now have moved to a voluntary donation system. These are data from the World Health Organization. They say that 79 countries collect over 90% of their blood supply from voluntary and paid blood donors. However, 56 countries collect more than 50% of their blood supply from family replacement or paid donors. In general, voluntary donation is more prevalent among high-income countries, though middle income and low income countries have been trending towards higher rates of volunteer donors in recent years. So in general, an increase of 10.7 million blood donations from voluntary and paid donors has been reported from 2008 and 2018. So it seems that instead of what Titmuss was forecasting, that the introduction of a market for blood would displace, would crowd out, would destroy the gift giving of blood, it seems that countries are moving towards the gift giving of blood, starting from a market for blood. So it seems that it's not a necessary argument, it's not a necessary effect that the market for blood would colonize the gift giving of blood and would destroy it. Again, the last and most important argument is the attempt by Titmuss to preserve, as I told you, opportunities for altruism. This is an argument that is usually entangled with the so-called domino effect argument. It is important to understand this kind of entanglement, even to disentangle them, and to understand what is at stake. Most of these scholars who have been trying to reread Titmuss' book have tried to reframe this kind of argument. I will show you some of the main attempts to reframe this argument. Now, as I told you, perhaps one of the most famous objections was the one coming from the Nobel laureate Kenneth Arrow. And this is also one of the most contested objection to Titmuss. Arrow wrote, like many economists that do not want to rely too heavily on substituting ethics for self-interest, I think it is best on the whole that the requirement of ethical behavior be confined to those circumstances where the price system breaks down. We do not wish to use up recklessly the scarce resources of altruistic motivation. Why should it be that the creation of a market for blood would decrease the altruism embodied in giving blood? Now, these are two distinct arguments. The first one is the most contested one, as I said. The second one raises a legitimate question that I will try to address with the domino argument. Now, many scholars like Sandel, and before Sandel, Peter Singer, the famous philosopher, wrote a sort of counter review in order to defend Titmuss against Arrow. In this paper, 1973, Peter Singer was trying to frame this kind of defense of Titmuss. Now, he claims something like altruism is not a scarce resource. This is typical language, the language typical of economics. And to think about altruism in terms of scarce resource betrays this kind of language. And it's also problematic because it may have some sort of, we would say today, performative effect. But anyway, the core of Singer's argument is that altruism is not only not a scarce resource, but there are empirical evidence that altruism fosters altruism, depending on the context or institutions in which we live or in which altruism is supposed to be fostered. Michael Sandel also echoes this famous claim by Singer, and is also writing against not only Arrow, but against Summers. And he claims something like this economistic view of virtue fuels the faith in markets and propels their reach into places they do not belong. Pay attention to this because Sandel again is thinking in terms of market versus non-market spheres. Propels their reach into places they do not belong. But the metaphor is misleading, Sandel says. Altruism, generosity, solidarity, and civic spirit are not like commodities that are depleted with use. They are more like muscles that grow stronger with exercise. One of the defects of a market-driven society is that it lets these virtues languish. To renew our public life, we need to exercise them more strenuously. Okay, let's focus now for a second on Sandel, as well as on the previous objection by Peter Singer, that is altruism fosters altruism. I don't know whether you agree on this kind of objection, but I think they are problematic too. First, we can, of course, say something like, well, we may agree with the idea that altruism fosters altruism. We know, for example, that in a love affair, in a love relationship, this kind of altruism, the idea of giving something, nurture a gift or return gift, or reinforce the sense of love or friendship, if we are talking about a friendship relation. So intuitively speaking, I would say both Sandel and Singer are true. But I think their metaphors are misleading too. Why? Because if it is true that altruism fosters altruism and muscles grow stronger with exercise, now you know that muscle grows stronger with exercise, but you also know that muscles doesn't grow forever. And also altruism doesn't last forever. So if it were entirely true that altruism fosters altruism, if this is true, then why should we be afraid, like Titmuss, of the introduction of a blood market and its alleged erosive effect on altruism? Imagine the situation where the time in which Titmuss is writing his book. There are, as I told you, these two economists, Kohler and the other one, I don't remember his name, but they are claiming something like, we want to introduce the market. Now imagine a world in which there is a new market for blood that is being introduced, and there is already there a gift-giving system. Now, why should we be worried about the introduction of the market for blood? According to Titmuss, it may colonize, it may crowd out, we will see this kind of argument. But if altruism really fosters altruism, why should we be worried about the introduction of the market? Because if it is a virtuous circle, this kind of virtuous circle should last forever. But we know that it doesn't last forever. So it's a little bit strange that Singer's argument may backfire. It can be read even against Titmuss, in the sense that if it is really true that altruism fosters altruism, there is nothing to be worried about. You see my point? And the same goes for muscles, grow stronger with exercise. If it is really true that they grow stronger and people are already giving the blood, now we should imagine a situation where this gift giving of blood should increase over time, because altruism fosters altruism. And if it increases over time, why should we be worried about the introduction of the market? It should increase rather than decrease. So we need to find a better reason to say, or a better argument to say, well, there must be some trouble with the introduction of the market. Okay. Now, I would also like to provide a more cynical objection. The coexistence of a voluntary blood donation system and a paid system is the only way to prove that those who donate blood are truly doing so motivated by altruism and that they are not corruptible by the market. I repeat, imagine the situation where you are introducing the market for blood. Now, it's only then that you might test whether these people are really giving altruistically, authentically altruistically. Because if they are not tempted by the, let's say, by the bad market that may corrupt them, how can we say that they are really giving altruistically? You see my point? So this is another problem, because if you are assuming that, as Titmuss does, that the problem is you don't want to erode the sense of altruism, then you should prove why the market may corrode the sense of altruism. And maybe you may even cynically think that those people were perhaps not giving out of altruism, maybe giving for, I don't know, thousand or different reasons, and therefore they are corrupted by the market because they were not originally altruistic, you may say. Of course, this is a cynical objection, but you have to keep this objection in mind if you really want to prove that those people that are giving blood are giving it out of altruism. Now, it is true, nevertheless, as Titmuss, as Peter Singer claimed, that among those gigantic questions that Titmuss was trying to frame, the so-called unanswered question that Titmuss himself recognizes as being really problematic, and that his book exploded in a sense, or metaphorically speaking, exploded in his hands, is that what Titmuss was trying to understand through the case of blood and giving of blood, he was really trying to understand or to address the question, what sort of society do we want? And that is the question of the good society, the typical legal, political, economic, philosophic question of what is a good society, or how should we think about that? And this is also the reason why the problem of human bond and human relationship is essential to understand perhaps what Titmuss left as something that we should still reflect upon, something that, as I will try to do in the conclusion, we should try to address. Okay, and we'll tell you something more in the epilogue. The corruption argument is really more problematic, I would say, because, as I told you, it's an entanglement of different kinds of arguments. And let me show you the two main key passages of Titmuss' book, that is the commercialization and profit in blood has been driving out the voluntary donor, and this kind of claim was seen and has been seen still today as the origin of the crowding out argument. And the second argument that is a little bit more tricky is that the commercialization of blood and donor relationships represses the expression of altruism, erodes the sense of community. I will show you why we need to disentangle the sentence 1 from sentence 2. Now let's see one of the most famous attempt to reframe Titmuss' argument, that is the one provided by David Arshar, a famous philosopher. He said that the very first claim, commercialization of profit in blood, has been driving out the voluntary donor, is a claim that can be understood in terms of the market in blood is imperialistic. So the driving out can be read in terms of imperialism of the market. The second statement can be read in terms of the market in blood is dehumanizing. That is something that is closer to the problem of commodification, degradation, or corruption of some human trait or trait of the human character. And this is written in David Arshar, Selling Yourself, Titmuss' argument against the market in blood. Now, I will not go into the detail of Arshar's way of framing the dominant argument. It's important at least to understand what is at stake when we think that if we do not leave some space for altruism, then there might be this sort of domino effect. So Arshar says something like, with respect to some good, P, let's say blood, one must think of P in either exclusively monetary terms, P is priced, or exclusively non-monetary terms, P is priceless, without price, beyond price, as when we say life is priceless. Behind this, of course, very important distinction, there is the very famous Kantian distinction between price and dignity. But anyway, this is something that I have to leave on the background. So what are the effect of this premise, the second premise, and then the conclusion? According to Arshar, there is a sort of contamination of meaning. And why this is possible, at least to Arshar? Because the effect of a market in P, even if it coexists with non-market exchanges of P, is that P comes to be thought of in dominantly, if not exclusively, monetary terms. If I can sell P for, let's say, $1,000, then the gift of P has a market equivalent. So imagine when we were, remember when I told you imagine that we are introducing the market for blood. Now, the introduction of the market for blood create, according to this argument, this kind of new way of thinking. We know that giving this gift now has a tag price. So we know that the gift now has a value, a market value, or a market equivalent. So even if I do not sell P, the worth of my gift of P is conceived in monetary terms. The 1,000 foregone by donation rather than sale. So if blood is also a commodity, then all I have given to the recipient is the cash equivalent of the blood, not the gift of life itself. And this is the conclusion. Thus, the market in P comes to dominate in the sense that there is no opportunity for a pure gift of P, the donation of P, being equivalent to the transfer of its monetary value. The second, I hope this is clear, so this is why I also read at length this kind of argument reframed by Arshar, because it's important to understand what Titmuss may have thought, but I would say this is Arshar rather than Titmuss, what Arshar is trying to do with the reframing of Titmuss' argument. There is a second dominant argument that is the so-called erosion of motivation, where there is a market in some good P, the possibility of selling P erodes the motivation to engage in non-monetary exchanges of P. It is not rational, at least from this perspective, it is not rational to exchange P without remuneration when one could. So why should you give something if there is a market, according to this argument? It's irrational. Thus, a market in P will come to dominate in the sense that there will be little, if any, reason to retain the practice of non-monetary exchanges of P. Now, let me show you why even this great attempt to reframe Titmuss' argument may be problematic. And I'm trying to explain why even the domino argument, however it is framed, may be problematic from at least a logical point of view. As far as I see the problem, if you read carefully Titmuss' statement, the commercialization of blood and donor relationships, one, represses the expression of altruism, and two, erodes the sense of community, I think that we should wonder whether and how the claim one, the mercantilization or commercialization of blood and donor relationship represses the expression of altruism, whether this claim implies also the claim two, that erodes the sense of community. You see here that there is a big jump between the part and the whole. One thing is to say that there is a repression of the altruism, and another thing is to say that this repression of the expression of altruism may erode the sense of community. This is a big jump from the part to the whole, and I will show you why. And as I said in that paper that I'm citing at the bottom of the page, this is a typical, another famous fallacy. Let's first read Titmuss when he claims that the evidence shows the extent to which commercialization and profit in blood has been driving out the voluntary donor. Moreover, it is likely that a decline in the spirit of altruism in one sphere of human activities will be accompanied by similar changes in attitudes, motives, and relationships in other spheres. Now, he said it is likely, but he didn't prove whether the connection between the one and two is a necessary connection, and I doubt that it is a necessary connection. To explain you why, I think this is a typical fallacy of composition, another famous logical fallacy. Or if you don't like the logical fallacy, the fallacy of composition, you may say that it is a hasty generalization. To explain the point, consider this. According to Titmuss, the 80% of blood donors can be classified as altruistic, according to the surveys he delivered to UK blood donors and USA blood donors. And that is, when he defines altruism, it means as having a high sense of social responsibility towards the needs of other members of society. Now, even if we assume by hypothesis that claim 1 is true, blood donors, and this is empirical data, are only on average 3–4% of the population in Western countries. So how can this little part of the society determine the erosion of the sense of the destruction of the sense of community? So how can one imply two? Again, this is a fallacy of composition. You are assuming that the properties of the whole, the society, are entirely determined by the properties of the part, which is something that is difficult to prove, really difficult to prove. Now, imagine also by hypothesis, and this is even a stronger claim that I would like to provide you. Imagine even that, again, by hypothesis, 100% of the population is a blood donor, and that everyone's expression of altruism is repressed, as Titmuss claimed, by the market for blood. For example, they all shift to this market. We introduced a market for blood. Once there was a market for a gift giving of blood system. Now everybody shift to this market. But again, the question still remains: why should the whole sense of community be eroded? It's still a big jump from the part to the whole. So that's why it's a sort of fallacy of composition. Now, I'd like to conclude this section with Margaret Radin. She wrote a famous book in this Moral Limits of Market debate. But this is a paper of her. And she also said something like, for the domino theory to hold, we must naturally tend to commodify. And this natural tendency seems to be merely a debatable ideological postulate. We need to prove that we have this kind of natural tendency to be commodified by the market and so forth. So the idea that the introduction of market for blood may colonize or may, in a sense, degrade us in terms of commodification still need to be proved. Okay. Let me conclude with this, that it's a way to give you a hint to the conclusion. What I claimed in that paper is that what is mainly unclear in Titmuss' book is that there is a sort of lots of overlapping zones between what he claims to be the blood donation, the social bond, and social policy. So we should wonder whether human blood, when he talks about human blood, he's talking about human bond, or whether, as I think he is doing, he's talking about socialist social policy as a form of social bond. As I told you, there is this big anthropological assumption that institutions will frame our attitude, will determine our attitude towards altruism, our altruistic, I would say, tendencies. But again, there is this problem of the ultra obligations that you notice. And in a passage, an important passage, I don't know how many have noticed that, in an important passage, Titmuss is citing Isaiah Berlin when he's pointing to the problem of the legal political obligation, what keeps us together as members of society. And of course, he sees in the blood a kind of big metaphor of this social bond. As Fontaine has noticed, there is a big metaphor behind the gifted relationship. There is a strong analogy between individual body and the body politics. What is it that holds a society together? This is, of course, a big question. And Titmuss' conclusion is that only a socialist social policy in encouraging the sense of community played a central role. It's only socialist social policy. So he was fighting this kind of ideological battles, but the full trap of the same ideological battle he was fighting. So I want to give you a final note on the subtitle of the book. So maybe a better way to understand that book is not phrasing the subtitle in terms of from human blood to social policy, but from human blood to social bond. And that was the problem that Titmuss wasn't capable to address. Now, just give me 5–10 minutes and I will conclude. But this is important to understand now the title of my presentation. I want to complicate the picture and go beyond the gift versus market dichotomy. And this is something that I told you. Think about these very few considerations. First, Some studies show that some peculiar types of incentives, such as gift card or ticket lottery, can increase blood donation. So it's not necessarily and always true that there is this crowding out effect, that if you are given some sort of incentive, the gift giving of blood may decrease. Indeed, sometimes it can increase. The second point is that, and this is, I think, the most important one, together with the third and the fourth, is that the gift market opposition is a really reductive one. First, because it does not take into account the industrial aspect of medical donation, and because it is exclusively focused on the donor and his or her motivation. Titmuss is insisting on and on, again and again, on the fact that it is an act out of altruism, but it is merely focused on the donor. But soon after the gift giving of blood, that blood enters into a very gigantic industry where many people are working for money, not for out of a sense of gratuity, I would say. And this industry that makes the gift giving of blood circulate and go to the persons in need, or those who need that kind of money, should be kept into account. Also, the Titmuss dilemmas of altruism and self-love is, I would say, another dichotomy fallacy, because it does not exhaust the complex range of human motivations. Why? Well, we know, I would say, we know very well that we are not binary, in the sense that either we are altruistic or we pursue some sort of self-love or self-interest. We know that the range of human motivation are very complex, and most of the time they can even overlap with each other, and they can coexist. Consider this example, this title from the BBC News: should we pay people for donating blood? And then in this newspaper news, there is this guy who says, well, I felt good to both help others and make some money. He was paid, but he was believing, and I think we should give him credit, was believing that on the one hand he was acting, in a sense, as Titmuss would say, out of altruism or motivated by a sense of altruism. But at the same time, he was even happy to receive some sort of money. Okay, and this is a way to show you that there might be some sort of overlapping between the motivations. Again, Titmuss' dilemma, as I said, is a dichotomy fallacy because it risks overshadowing, neglecting other values at stake. Why? Because when we consider the problem of introducing a market for blood versus an already existing gift-giving blood system, we should also take into account the very important value of lives that we are saving thanks to the giving of blood. Now, if you do a comparison between the values at stake, you might say, okay, who cares about the fact that people may be paid for giving blood? They are saving lives. So should we prioritize altruism or saving lives? This is a kind of moral reasoning that I think we should at least try to keep into account. And we should try to keep into account whether altruism is more important, for example, than saving lives. Because if you are paid and at the same time you are saving life, you might say, what's wrong with that? And also there are many other institutions not reducible to the welfare state or market economy that can nurture altruism and social bonding. For example, family and voluntary sector. It's not all about state versus market. Again, it's a dichotomy fallacy. Reality is not exhausted by state versus market. Many Nobel laureates in economics, Douglas North, and many others, told us that we should get out of this kind of dichotomic way of thinking. Now, I want to show you why the voluntary sector may be crucial. If you think about the post-Titmuss debate, many have been trying to understand why Titmuss was trying to defend the welfare state, or why Titmuss was trying to write about the gift giving of blood and at the same time defending the welfare state. Because as I told you, he saw in this gift to stranger something that is closer to the logic of the welfare state. Well, Titmuss was trying to reread the very famous book by Marcel Mauss about the gift. And as you might know, Marcel Mauss left unanswered another big question at the very end of the gift, that famous book. And the unanswered question was whether the gift is still alive in modern society, because he studied the ancient society. So Marcel Mauss said something like, well, maybe the welfare state is still a modern form of circulation of the gift, even if the gift seems to be disappeared in modern society, but perhaps the welfare state is a modern form of circulation of the gift. And Titmuss took it seriously. So it was trying to address the problem in the big society now, in the modern and current society. So that's why he was, again, insisting on the gift giving of blood, because he thought he saw in the gift giving of blood, even if a little part of the national healthcare system, but he saw a symbol, a symptom of this modern form of circulation of the gift. But then there is a problem, because if you understand the welfare state as a modern form of circulation of the gift, then you may wonder whether taxation, because the welfare state relies a lot, heavily, hugely on taxation, whether taxation and the redistribution of wealth through the welfare state can be conceived as a modern system of circulation of the gift. And if you say yes, as Titmuss was implying, then there is a big and further question, because once such a gift is institutionalized, regulated and sanctioned through legal mechanisms, does it not risk being crowded out or corrupted, and or not leaving room for genuinely altruistic motives? In this sense, one of the most famous objections came from, I will go through this, I can send you the paper if you wish. This is another paper of mine on an institutionalized gift giving, but it's a way to address this problem and to show that in order to get out of the gift versus market, gift versus exchange, or donation versus money, in order to get out from this dichotomy, we should think about them in a more complementary way. Because we may think that, and this can be shown with this quote by Harris, we may think that a properly constituted welfare state in which there existed a strong sense of community would depend first on altruistic behavior to supply need-satisfying resources, and secondly, if necessary, on a backup system of enforceable rights, if ever there were a shortfall of resources. If altruism fails, rights take over. If altruism works, rights do not need to be invoked. So you may think that there must be a sort of background duty, a system through which altruism is in a sense fostered, nurtured, and so the institutions in a sense doesn't force you to be altruistic. They simply works in a different way. And I will show you in conclusion a possible way of understanding institution as a way to foster, as Titmuss intuited but framed it badly, the question. I can skip through the very famous objection provided, raised by Godbout in the World of the Gift, because he's simply trying to turn Titmuss' argument upside down. So he simply claims that the state doesn't belong to the same sector of the gift because it is precisely the family or the third sector, the very place, the very the locus, the primary locus of the world of the gift. So to conclude, as I told you, there is a big question, unanswered question, that is what sorts of society, as Singer noticed, what sort of society do we want to live? And that is the big question of the good society. Now, if you have ever been in this famous plaza, this is Siena Plaza, famous plaza, where in that very civic building there is this big picture. It was made by Ambrogio Lorenzetti at the very end of the 14th century. It is known as the the effect of good and bad government into the countryside and in the city, that raises this big question of what is a good polity or good society, good government. Let's focus just on the plaza. That is where you see this kind of wonderful, beautiful girls that are dancing on the plaza in a circle. Why there is this kind of circle? What is the meaning of this circle? To explain you, this is the bad government, the bad effects of a bad government. To explain you the meaning, I can resort to one of my heroes, that is Luigi Einaudi, that he also used this kind of frescoes, Lorenzetti's frescoes, in the cover of his book, again entitled Il Buon Governo. And as I told you, to explain this logic of the cycle of receiving and doing good, or giving and receiving, or to be more precise, to receive and again giving, let's start from at the individual level. And I can use this quote. I love this quote by Simone Weil. At the bottom of the heart of every human being, from earliest infancy until the tomb, there is something that goes on indomitably expecting, in the teeth of all experience of crimes committed, suffered, and witnessed. And what is this something that goes on indomitably expecting? Is that good and not evil will be done to him. We all expect to receive some form of good. At an individual level, I repeat, but this is also true, I would say, at the big society level. So to understand this, consider this very, very, I would say, mysterious passage of the Nicomachean Ethics by Aristotle. In the plaza, he says, this is why we set up a shrine of the graces in a public place to remind men to return a kindness. We set up a shrine, a temple, to the graces in a public place to remind men. He's not saying that we are forcing people to be altruistic. Those kind of graces, those kind of temples are there to remind men to return a kindness. For that is a special characteristic of grace, since it is a duty not only to repay a service done one, but another time to take the initiative in doing a service oneself. The cycle here is to be meant as the circulation of the gift, the cycle of receiving and doing good. And if you think this is a too old story, and I will conclude in 3 minutes, Sina. If you think that this is a too old story, think about the many representation of 2000. This is a 2000 years representations of the graces. And even recently, when I went to George Mason University, I found this, again, the graces, I would call them. And there is behind this picture, it is written Communitas by the author, Adriel Auret. I don't know if I'm pronouncing it well. And in that plaque, there is written, it is dedicated to George Mason University, and there is written Communitas, that means cum, that is with, together, plus munus, that is gift in Latin. And munus meant, and still means, a public service rendered by a citizen to his community in the form, for instance, of a financial donation, military service, or holding public offices. Now, the background of the story is, at least for my research, is now this critical point theory. To explain this, let's consider that it was trying to understand those kind of very strange contribution to the public good. And the name of this contribution in the Periclean polis was the liturgia. Liturgia were a form of voluntary oblation to the res public. And he discovered that this kind of liturgia were injection virtues and vicious circles, and they were at the heart of public finance, and I would say, and of any society, depending on societal and political, horizontal and vertical relations of reciprocity. So, as to put in now this word, the tax system is the condition, the effect, and the sign of a good or bad society. So, what does this mean? That it means that from an epistemological and anthropological point of view, it is a theory of the limit and freedom And at the same time, a theory explaining the virtuous cycle underlying every society and institution. It simply states that in any society, in any social phenomena, there always exists a point, a threshold, beyond which what before was good transforms into bad or vice versa. This should remind you the domino effect, but in another way of understanding the domino. As I'm saying here, I'm trying to tell you, I would say, that the domino effect is not a necessarily effect, it depends on our freedom in many respects. So it cannot be framed in terms of a necessary effect. And again, if you would like to frame this with, let's conclude with Martinelli's, I would say, here it is. I would say there is a logic of enough, which can overcome the dominance of defection, provided that the sense of membership is in play. Donors cooperate if confident that enough blood is being provided by enough members. Thus, public goods, which depend on creative altruism, are a matter both of a large enough total to secure the good and of enough contributors for mutual reassurance that contributing is a worthy activity. Enough is then enough. So when is a sufficient number of truly free men in a society really sufficient? When enough is enough? Of course, this depends on our freedom. So to conclude and rephrase Titmuss' anthropological institutional assumption that I mentioned at the beginning, remember that Titmuss said men are not born to give. To reframe this, I would say we are born to receive. And we have to remember those kind of institutions that are beyond the market and the state, such as the family. We have been given through the language. We have been nurtured by our mother. We have been taken care of. We have found someone that has been, helping us in any respect when we were exposed to any sort of problem, any sort of fragility, any sort of vulnerability. So first we receive, and then maybe we can give once more. But we have to accept the fact that we have already received. So even if men are not born to give, I would say men are born to receive, and then they are at the same time born to give because they've already received. So as newcomers, I would say, of course, we do not face the dilemma of altruism and self-love, but how we learn to give, it's because we have already received. So the ways in which we organize and structure, the social institution, starting from family, third sectors, and so forth, can, yes, encourage or discourage the altruistic in men. But this is not only an issue of the state, as Titmuss believed. It's not an issue of social policy. It's more an issue of learning the very simple fact that we have already received, and therefore maybe we should take care of the fact that we should give once more. So that's why, as Aristotle said, we set up a shrine in the public space to remind men to return a gift, precisely because we have already received. So I conclude here, and thank you so much. Maybe I've spoken for too long. Thank you, Sina.
Thank you so much, Paolo. No, you not at all. As it was perfect in terms of length, and it was wonderful, really, very, very insightful, extremely. It's 100% related really to the main theme of the seminar. So thank you so much for this very insightful talk that
thank you.
Raises a whole range of questions and interrogations. Thank you, Paolo. So we have around 40 minutes for the discussion. Maybe I would start by some questions and comments, and then I would try to be brief. Then I would give the floor to others and want to ask other questions, and then if there are no more questions, I would maybe ask some further questions. The first maybe issue about like getting to know more about Titmuss's position, imagining in a sort of gift relationship, you don't have enough blood donation, then what does he propose as a solution? Does he discuss this question? I mean, is he proposing, for example, anywhere the idea of rendering blood donation obligatory, for example, or is it supposed to remain really a voluntary act? And then if, imagine we don't have enough money, there is not enough donation, what does he propose as a solution? Does he discuss that point or not at all?
No, it doesn't discuss the issue because, but for a very specific reason, because as I mentioned at the beginning, well, I just mentioned, but I didn't go through that. It was even trying to show that the gift giving of blood system is more efficient than the market for blood. So it didn't even raise the question whether there might be a supply of blood that is not sufficient, or where there should not be, that there might not be a sufficient amount of blood to compare to the demand of blood. But this is an important question for the very simple reason that if you think about the current situation, especially for the plasma, I don't know if you know the data, but they are really amazing, because we know, as in the title of the newspaper I showed you, we know that in Europe there is a huge lack, a shortage of plasma, and we are importing all the plasma from the USA, that is a market system. Now, this is a big hypocrisy, because if you ban the very simple idea the fact that you should not be paid to give your plasma, so you can only give your plasma for free as an act, let's say, out of altruism, then why are you importing this kind of plasma from the USA, that is a market for plasma? And market for plasma is saving hundreds and thousands of lives. So we are discussing now whether we have to abolish this kind of ban, because we have a huge need of plasma, and Europe can provide it by introducing a market for plasma. Of course, Titmuss was not thinking about the market for plasma because it was a more recent market. He was thinking just about the most common way of giving blood, and there is a big different technological difference, because if you give plasma, it's a completely different way of processing the blood, because if you give plasma, you have to extract the plasma and then you can re-inject in the donor the blood that was given. So you can give plasma at least twice a week, even twice a week, while if you give blood, you can give it once every 48 days or something like that, because you have to wait the reconstitution of the plasma. It's a little bit more complicated. But I mean, from the point of view of your question, it's a big issue, because we are entirely dependent on the USA, and the USA, it's 1.8% of the exporting of the export, which is a huge industry, big industry. It's a very big industry, and they are exporting the 70% of the blood that is given around the world. So 70% of the world, I would say, of the plasma that is circulating around the world is imported from the USA, because it's the only country that is capable of producing plasma, which is, of course, a big industry, but at the same time, they are saving lots of lives, because thanks to the plasma, you can do lots of plasma therapies, from hemophilia to many other therapies that really saves life.
Because thank you so much. Because you know what I find somewhat strange in terms of the analogy, I mean, like inscribing the issue of gift within the context of welfare state, given that in the welfare state, it is not based on giving gifts, but as you said about it is based on compulsory taxation, then it seems to me that a more reasonable analogy would be basically opposing market for blood based on a situation in which, for example, people would have the obligation to give blood. You know, like for example,
That's right.
you would simply oblige people to give, I don't know, 10 milliliters of blood per year or something like that. So it seems to me, you see, so in that sense, I mean, there is a sort of bizarre, it seems to me bizarre, something is missing in the analogy. So the market, so if you introduce the welfare state, then it is not the gift giving, it is, and so why not, for example, why didn't he say, well, you know, we shouldn't have markets for blood, we should simply force people to give some blood as we force them to pay taxes somehow.
That's right. This is most of the post-Titmuss debate was concerned about this kind of objection, and even those who have been working, as they say, in the so-called post-Titmuss paradigm or post-Titmuss way of thinking, they realized that to understand the welfare state in terms of altruism was really too much. It's too generic. I mean, you cannot understand the welfare state in those kind of terms for the very simple reason that welfare state is a really composite assemblage of different kinds of, I would say, different kinds of reciprocities. At least I would say, like if you pay for the pension scheme, that is a kind of return that you expect sooner or later. Pension scheme is part of the welfare state, but it can be understood as a tit for tat. You pay something in order to get something in return later, maybe. And the welfare state is also, of course, the national healthcare system, but it's again based on a compulsory mechanism. So that's right. You can try. You should try. You, Titmuss, should have tried, I would say, to compare the market for blood versus other obligatory forms of giving. Maybe it should have been a proper way of understanding this. I wrote a paper about another hybrid case that I think it's really intriguing, and this is the percentage tax designation mechanism, because it's a very kind of, as I'm used to say, is a strange case of Dr. Taxpayer and Mr. Charity, because you as taxpayer are given the possibility of giving a little portion of your income tax as a gift to a third sector organization. At the very moment in which you are signing, I mean, the tax return, you can say, I want to give this money, 0.5% of income tax, to a voluntary organization. Now, it still remains within a mandatory framework, because if you don't choose, if you do not express the choice, then that money will remain taxes anyway. But at the same time, it's a way to use taxes as a gift, which is a more realistic way to say, I want to give my money to this third sector organization. I know that they are doing good, and I want to keep this circulation of the good alive. And the reason why I can still consider that as a gift is that from the point of view of the giver, me as taxpayer, if I give or not to give that money makes all the difference if I want to do the good of the beneficiary. And if I interpret altruism as a form of doing good, literally doing good, etymologically doing good, then I have to give that money. And especially for the beneficiary, that money is a gift anyway, because if I don't express my choice, the beneficiary that received this tax money will not receive that money. So from the beneficiary point of view, is a gift anyway. If from my point of view, the point of view of the taxpayer, it can still be understood as a form of gift, because I'm using that money to do the good. So it's a more nuanced way to introduce the gift, even within this mandatory framework of taxation. And it's an hybrid and an extremely interesting case.
That's interesting. Thank you. Thank you so much. Yes, because then how to put it? Maybe one last question to make sure I understand Titmuss's position. The critique of the market for blood, is it aimed at, for example, does he argue in favor of abolishing or forbidding such markets, or is he making basically a sort of ethical argument? The sense that it seems to me that, for example, your argument regarding the dichotomic relationship, the Manichaean relationship, it only holds if he's saying that, yes, so the blood market would have all these detrimental effects, so let's forbid it. But then again, if he does it, then he has to offer clear arguments about how he conceives of an alternative way of organizing the requirement of having enough blood. So but if he does not express explicit approval of forbidding blood markets, he's simply saying that it is a bad thing, he's trying to castigate it without saying that they should definitely be forbidden, then I don't think the critique regarding the Manichaean point of view holds, because he's just criticizing that and offering gift more as a sort of ethical perspective, which is not the same thing as a political perspective. I don't know if I'm saying, because, you know, if there is no obligation in that sense, I don't know if I'm clear with what I'm saying.
No, I see the point. I think it's both, because he wants to forbid the market, and in order to forbid the market, he provides moral or economic, indeed, a moral argument. Among the economic ones, as I told you, there is this idea that there might be, even introducing the market, there might be a shortcoming of the supply of market, which is, of blood, which is not true. It has been shown that it is empirically false, and even the kind of surveys that they provided according to Arrow were highly mistaken, were misleading even the donor's reply. So I would say, yes, it was trying to do both. It was trying to at least avoid the introduction rather than forbidding, avoid the introduction in the UK, because these two famous economists were trying to provide reasons to introduce this market. And at the same time, it was also providing moral arguments in favor, I would say, in favor of the giving of blood and against the market for blood. So it's, I would say it's both. I don't know if I replied to your point.
Absolutely, yes, you did. If those still present, if you want to come forward, ask questions, comments, please, I invite you to do so. Please don't hesitate to come forward. I mean, you can just ask your questions without activating your camera. Don't want to be captured in the recording. If not, maybe I would maybe yes.
Just one question.
Yes, please, Pierre. Yes.
Is there some evidence that paying for blood actually increases the amount of blood collected compared
sorry, is there any evidence whether
that paying for blood increases the amount collected compared to just advertising campaign, asking people to be donors, or because there is a question of getting money, and also a question of communication about conditions. If there is a blood collection next door, maybe I would go. if you see what I mean?
Yeah, yeah.
How can we measure the effect of introducing a payment from a practical point of view? How can we compare the situations?
Let me ask you a further question to better understand your question, I would say, because if you are asking whether there is a connection between paying for blood and the further influence of marketing, advertisement, or some form of incentive. So you are asking something like, can we disentangle the incentives provided by paying for blood and incentives provided by the marketing or the marketization of, as many associations do. There is, for example, the blood. I mean, we are celebrating the gift giving of blood or the World Donor Day or something like that. So we are, in a sense, incentivizing the gift giving of blood through some sort of publicity, advertisement, and so forth. So are you asking whether it's possible to disentangle these two? No, I don't know. I mean, if the question is this one, I don't know if there might be, I guess, evidence, but I haven't gone through, I haven't came across to this kind of evidence, but should I find them, I will let you know through Sina or just write me an email. I'm still working on this, so it's a little bit, well, I've been working on this in the last 3 years, I would say, but not from the point of view of the evidence, but more from the philosophical point of view. That is, the main arguments that are framed to address or all the post-Titmuss debates till the market, the more limits of market debate. So I was not so much concerned about those kind of evidence. So I'm sorry that I cannot give you any data, any reliable data.
Gerd, do you have other remarks or questions? Not for now. Okay, because maybe I found some of your counter arguments. You know, for example, the sort of cynical objection in terms of to test whether people are truly altruistic, we should give them the possibility of not doing so or being tempted by something. I don't find it that convincing in the sense that, you know, it's like it's so general that it could really easily lead to a whole range of, you know, I mean, in the sense of, I don't know, saying, for example, I mean, because it's also the question of temptation, what kind of temptation, you know, and then like having the because, you know, by the way, sorry, one thing, yes, maybe that's the better argument. The simple fact, I mean, if the alternative was about the obligation to donate, your argument would hold. But since there is no obligation, the simple fact of donating or not donating seems to me enough of an argument. When you donate, you can simply refuse to donate. Then why is it that the possibility of being able to gain money by donating, what would that add? Simply, I mean, right? I mean, what you said makes more sense if the alternative was between being obliged to donate and or having the possibility to gain money by donating.
That's right. I think you are right. I was exaggerating the argument because I wanted to, at least to provoke, I would say, Titmuss, let's say, an ideal dialogue with Titmuss, to say that Titmuss is simply assuming that people are really altruistic. What I wanted to say that if you want to really prove that people are altruistic, you have to give them also the temptation, let's say, to see whether they can shift to the market. Because if they're really altruistic, they should not shift to the market if you introduce the market. I mean, if they are doing that really out of altruism or out of a pure sense of altruism, my provocation was, why should they be corrupted by the market? I mean, if I do something, and this is a another, I mean, to try to reframe that argument, if I do something out of a sense of vocation, let's say vocation, the world is full of people doing vocational works and they are paid. Now, is this payment corrupting their vocation? It depends. Maybe if you are not so much motivated, if that vocation is such an authentic, it's not so much an authentic motivation, then it might be that the money may corrupt. But again, it's perhaps the money rather than the market that corrupts, because you are doing that only for money, as you say, as you might say. Now, this is in that sense, mine was a sort of provocation, because I was simply saying to Titmuss, how can you assume that all those people are giving just out of a sense of altruism? The range of motivation is really, really wide, first. And if you think that they are giving out of a sense of altruism, you are so convinced by that, why should the market corrupt them? So this is a way to tempt, in a sense, to test, I would say, the altruism. But you are right, in the sense that the real issue might be if you are obliged to give, because yes, that might be a big test, I would say. But in any way, I mean, I was just trying to provoke the simplification made by Titmuss. I think it's, I mean, there might be hundreds of different kinds of motivation to give blood. Maybe I want to give blood even for self-interest reasons, like I give blood because sooner or later, one day I will receive blood back, because I may be in need. And I mean, there is nothing particularly problematic about that, but I wouldn't say that this kind of motivation is really pure altruism. So the problem is that once you introduce the motivation of altruism, you really try to, you are deflecting perhaps the issue towards motivation rather than focusing on other types of motivation or other values at stake. As I said, life. If you want to keep the system of blood working well because you want to save lives, is then the question, the real question, the real problem, whether people are giving out of altruism or for money? Maybe the real problem is saving life, and therefore maybe the introduction of the market for blood is not such a big problem if you are saving life. Of course, and there is the big unanswered question. You might say, well, one thing is to pay someone for a vocation, because you have been trained, so you are remunerated because you have taken time to frame that kind of talent, vocation, or however you call it. Another thing is to think about the blood. You are born with the blood. So you are, in a sense, it's a sort of, it's something that you didn't work for it. It's something that you didn't, you didn't go to the training process, along the training process, to produce the blood in your body. So it's something, it's already a gift. That's why I think the big issue, the big unanswered issue is the analogy between the gift giving of blood and the gift of life. Because maybe I could say what Titmuss was trying to say was the gift of life, or trying to preserve from the logic of the market. But this implies a rather, I would say, a quite much stronger argument. We need to think about this kind of gift of life. I tried to mention that at the very end of my presentation, that is, we receive something. The question is whether we can dispose of it arbitrarily, or whether we can put it on the market, or instead we should recognize this gift. Because I think that the true problem with the gift is always welcoming the gift. It's not giving, but welcoming the gift that you receive. Most of the time we do not acknowledge, we do not recognize the gift that we receive. and therefore we do not give once more. So this is, I think, the big anthropological, philosophical issue in the logic of the gift. If you think that, I mean, according to some philosopher, even Socrates, before dying, said that people didn't acknowledge that he was a gift for the community. So he was betrayed. This is Plato's words, Socrates' words, according to Plato, that the community, by condemning Socrates, were not acknowledging that they received the gift that is Socrates. So they were killing this gift. The same goes for Jesus and for other very famous examples. And so we might say that our tradition, our Western civilization was born, I would say, out of a betrayal and not a recognition of this kind of gifts, one might say. The philosophical tradition in which we are embedded, starting from Socrates. So I think the problem of the gift is, again, recognizing, welcoming the gift that you receive. Think about how many times kids and sons condemned their parents for having born because I didn't ask you to be born. It's a typical example. Think about the famous recent sentence where this American girl asked for money to their parents, and she won the trial because she said, I didn't ask to be born. So, you know, it's a tragic case, but really telling of perhaps what I'm trying to frame, badly frame. I think it's the real philosophical challenge is about recognizing the gift, the received gift.
But what yes, thank you so much. What I still don't get is that what is the specificity in your discussion and in Titmuss's discussion? What is the specificity of the blood aspect of the market? In that sense, what makes the blood market? I mean, why would he focus on the blood market? Why doesn't he simply extend the argument to the market in general? I mean, any market basically. So anything we should replace any form of market interaction with something either of a welfare state, let's say, sort of entirely planned economy, or in his argument, if it is about, like, you know, replacing any form of market interaction with some sort of gift giving and so on and so forth. Because it seemed to me that the major argument, one of the arguments that you invoked, was this idea that basically, specifically in this market, most people who are selling are poor people coming from poorer backgrounds. We may say that, for example, most people who do, let's say, degrading work, right? I mean, I don't know, cleaning toilets and stuff like that, they also come from lower backgrounds. So in that sense, you know, the fact that only very poor or underprivileged people engage in this market, can say that for a whole range of employments where, you know, only poor people are forced somehow, for example, to work as a toilet cleaner. Right. So in that sense, again, what is the specificity of the blood market in that sense? And yeah, so what is it that makes the blood market anything specific as opposed to any sort of market?
Yeah, that's right. This is a big question. It was addressed by Margaret Writing. The title of the paper was "The Market Domains," and there is a section that she devotes to this problem. And you are totally right. I mean, there is, I would say, no specificity of the the market for blood. Well, there are many, one might say, but at the same time, it's not clear why Titmuss was attacked. Well, it's clear from a contingent point of view because he was trying to reply to these two famous economists. But on the other hand, it seems that he was using the market for blood as a kind of rhetorical argument just to defend the gift giving of blood and the welfare state and so forth. So the reason why maybe I didn't make it so clear in my presentation, but the point might be framed in this way. There is no need to counterpose the gift giving of, or let's say, the gift to the market or the gift to exchange, because we might say that even the market relies heavily on this substratum of giving and gift giving. That's why I mentioned, for example, the family. Can you imagine a market, whatever is the market, not only the market for blood, can you imagine a market without your mother having taught you to speak, the gift of language, the institution of language that is provided within the circle of the family, or at least within the relation between the mother and the kid? It is the mother tongue you that teaches you, the tongue you, so to say. So that is, I mean, something that we cannot give for granted, but it is a big institution that people learn. And without language, as Adam Smith also noticed, you know, the exchanges have to do with the bartering capacity and skills have to do with our capacity to speak, to argue. So can you imagine a market without the institution of language? That is a big gift that we receive since we were born from our mother, or the education that we received freely as a gift from our parents, and many other kinds of gifts. So we should stop thinking gift versus exchange, gift versus market. We should perhaps start thinking in terms of there is the background that, in a sense, or the foundation of the market is this logic of gift and gift giving. So the problem might become if, how, and when the market may destroy this kind of basement foundation on which market is based. As to the second point, the question of coercion, you rightly mentioned, let me frame your question in this way. When, I could say in this way, when is a voluntary exchange not so much voluntary, that is perhaps coerced? So the issue of the background condition of the exploitative argument, the exploitation argument, sorry, is a serious one. But what I was trying to say, I can tell you this by resorting to Julian Rice's argument about that. He framed the problem in this way. If the problem is that we have a coerced exchange, we might want to remove the coerced side of the exchange rather than the exchange. If it is a forced exchange, the problem might not be the exchange as such, but the coercion as such. So we should perhaps improve the background condition that makes that exchange a forced exchange. So I repeat, we should remove the forced of the forced exchange rather than the exchange.
I understand, but just to be fair, I think your argument, I think maybe deliberately, I fully understand this is a completely valid argument, but you cannot overlook the fact that for over a century, there has been a whole range of ultra-liberal arguments saying that precisely it is the exchange that can remove the conditions that give rise to problematic exchanges, right? The sense that if the idea of removing the condition, right, is, I mean, the question is, how shall we remove it? Is it through further exchange, or is it through other interventions? And
Right.
I mean, like the Austrian and the Chicago style liberal argument is that no, basically, we should not, yeah, I mean, maybe less the Chicago style, because at least there you have the, the negative tax and everything, but more the Austrian style where you don't necessarily have that. In that sense, it depends on how is this background condition supposed to be ameliorated, through other exchange or through other forms of interventions? Because
Uh,
if you say other forms of intervention, then it seems to me that either you should say through government intervention, or you should say finally through gift. Then basically, you end up defending what you were trying maybe to criticize, don't you think?
no, because you might say, I mean, this is a big question because the issue of the how is open. I would say, in order to avoid to fall down or to fall within the state versus market dichotomy, you might say that there is even the third sector. There are many other ways to improve the condition, the background conditions. Now, of course, the libertarian argument is have more market. So solve market troubles with market means, I would say. I'm simplifying a bit. On average, I would say, yeah, the market has improved the conditions of many poor people around the world. This is a little bit contestable, but the data are, I would say, rather clear. But that is not only that is not the only solution. That's why I'm saying that the problem with Titmuss is that many falls within this trap of the dichotomy fallacy. There might be many other solutions that are not, I would say, traceable, or should not be necessarily traceable to the market or the state. And so it can be possible to conceive or to better conceive a more functional and working third sector that can be addressed the need of those in need, that can address, sorry, the needs of those in need, maybe in a logic that is closer to the territory where they are living and working and operating, and they know better than the state or the welfare state, or even than the market, what's best to do for them. So that's why I would exhort you to get out of this dichotomic way of thinking, but I'm not sure whether I replied to your point.
No, you replied, but I think again, I would say that maybe seems to me that since based on your responses, he's not necessarily advocating, unless this might be a weakness in his argument. He does not advocate for like welfare state in the sense of adding obligations. It seems to me that he's not in a dichotomic position, in the sense that we can say that already by adding gift is the third possibility, because market, the state obligation, and then the gift. Since he's adding the gift as a third possibility, then using this argument of dichotomic reasoning seems to me somehow problematic, in the sense that you forget that and there's another possibility that he does not invoke, which is really opposed to the market solution, which is a state obligations, as in the case of taxation.
That's right, but this is exactly what Godbout claimed against Titmuss. Godbout said, following this Godbout and Caillet, said that there is a third paradigm beyond the state and the market, but Titmuss seems to believe that the welfare state is the modern form of circulation of the gift, following Marcel Maull's, or well, trying to renew Marcel Maull's conclusion of the gift. And this is, I mean, the reason why it's really starking, I would say, that being, I would say, a defender of the welfare state, it doesn't see that lots of welfare can be done through the welfare, the third sector that is third in many respects between the state and the market. So he never mentioned, for example, third sector organizations. And usually we are used to think that as Godbout and Caillet and many others, that the proper place of the circulation of the gift is the primary and secondary family or or local ties, I would say, but not the market and the state. What I'm trying to say indeed is a little bit more. I'm saying, as I told you before, that the gift might be everywhere. The problem is that we do not recognize it. So, and this is a way not only to break up that dichotomy, but also to show that even the market relies also on some form of gift and gift giving. And you can even think about Adam Smith when he was saying that some form of commercial relationships over time may become lots of friend relationship over time. Of course, they are not born, they were not born as a form of friend relationship, but over time we know that people, even with local shopkeeper, the butcher, the brewer, to mention Adam Smith, at the local level may become gift-giving relationship, even if we go there to buy and sell something, but over time we may become the friend of the butcher, the brewer. Why not? And we can keep, alive both the relationship, that is the market relation, and possible gift-giving relation with them. And from a personal point of view, the personal ties with them, it's an overlapping of situations of market and exchange. But what I was trying to claim is more radical, because it's more about the origin of the market. That might be the origin of our life, and that's why maybe Titmuss, with this intuition that life might be a sort of gift, and the gift giving of blood is a replication of this gift of life. Anyway, this is a very big issue.
Very interesting. So if those still present, if you want to ask maybe the one last question, one last comment, please come forward. Otherwise, it's already 7:30. So other questions or comments? Yes, Pierre?
Yes. I think there is something a little bit strange in the discussion, because you are talking about gifts and altruism compared to market relationships. But in fact, when we are talking about blood, there are two aspects. The first one is that it's something necessary for life. I mean, you give blood or you don't give blood, people will survive or they will die. So it's like an old example of water in the desert. In the Middle Ages, there were already discussions about what the price of a glass of water in the desert. Would you let someone die because he cannot pay for the water? So it's not a gift like giving flowers when you are invited for dinner. It's not a gift building social relationships or social status, like in sociological studies, for instance. It's really something about life, and maybe also linked to, should we give food to people starving? And the second point is that blood is a part of the body, so you cannot consider it like food, because in practice there's something special about the human body. There is no market for organs. You would not make food with dead bodies. You would not heat a swimming pool, burning bodies. Because I'm mentioning that because I heard about a project where a crematorium would be, the heat would be used to heat a building, and that was rejected by the population in the UK. So there is something very special about the human body. Cannot be eaten, cannot be sold, it cannot be disposed of for industrial processing or whatever. So those two aspects, I mean, interfere with the discussion about altruism versus market. The first one is a vital aspect of life. It's a question of life or death. And the second one is the very special nature or the philosophical consideration of the human body. So it makes the matter very complex. So I was wondering, how is it possible to consider all those aspects at the same time?
Yeah, I know very well this kind of troubles, and the analogy between the blood and body parts is very widespread, and usually this the main argument to say that those kind of body parts should not be sold, we should not put price tags on these body parts, because if we put a price tags on these body parts, then sooner or later we will be commodified, or we will be degraded, or we will corrupt the sanctity of our body. That should not be violated by price, exchange, market, and so forth. And there are many discussions about the origin of this kind of arguments. Previously, I mentioned the Kantian argument, the famous Kantian argument that things either have a price or a dignity. This is the Kantian argument in the metaphysics, the famous metaphysics by Kant. Now, you are right. I mean, if you look at the current state of affairs, most of the time we forbid the possibility of using body parts like surrogate motherhood, selling kidneys, or whatever is the part that we are, corneas, for example, or other body parts. And the argument most of the time is, let's keep these, let's raise this, set up this wall against the market. And it's true that the blood has to do with giving lives. But at the same time, the case of blood, I think it's a little bit different from other cases like kidneys, because maybe it might be more risky to introduce the market for kidney. There is another array of arguments, the so-called repugnance of some types of markets. You know that there is another Nobel laureate in economics, Alvin Roth, who wrote a very famous, wrote several papers about this, and he won the Nobel Prize also for this. But he was simply trying to bypass, as he said, to work around the repugnance issue. So he didn't address the moral issue at stake. He simply accepted that people are repugnant or have some sense of repugnance against the selling of the kidneys, or in that case, it was kidneys. Now, as I was saying, in the case of blood, I think it's a little bit, might be conceived in a different way, because precisely because you are saving life, there is a strong argument to say, what's wrong with introducing the market in blood? It's, I would say, let's forget about the issue of altruism or the motivation. I might say cynically once more, or provocatively, who cares about the motivation? We will never know what is the motivation behind the gesture of giving the blood. But if by giving blood, whatever is your motivation, you are saving life, what's wrong with introducing the market for blood?
But sorry, just that argument is very easy to counter, because you can say that let's make a blood donation obligatory. So why markets? Why not obligation? People who use a welfare state, any form of welfare state, should have the obligation to give a certain quantity of blood donation per year, for example. If that is the argument.
But then they might curtail human freedom. They may limit human freedom. While if you have
But
the
like
market,
taxes, like taxes.
yeah, I know, but yes, you might say, why don't, I mean, if we make the donation of blood mandatory is like introducing taxes, but still people may think that there might be a sense of forcing, really, it's a sense of, I would say, coercion stronger than paying taxes, people might think. So I think you are right in the sense that logically speaking, why not, yeah, make it mandatory? But at the same time, you might also say, we already got the welfare state, people are already paying taxes, and for that very reason, we can save lives thanks to the taxes. So anyway, this is another counter-provocative point that you are making, and I now see, I would say I see better. I mean, the issue, because you might say, I mean, if it is so important to save lives, why don't we make giving of blood mandatory?
But why? In the discussion, you shouldn't we look at why some people think a market for blood is bad, because there is no, if you make the discussion for bread, you will not maybe wonder whether there should be a market for bread, or whether people should give bread to starving people freely, or they should be obliged to give bread or to pay for bread. So if there is such a reluctance, and if you look at the matter from a philosophical point of view, have you dig into the question of why there is a special reluctance, why the question is raised for blood and not for other markets which are very common and unquestioned?
As I was saying before, this kind of question was raised, to my knowledge, by Margaret Brading, because she was trying to understand what's the specificity. I mean, why Titmuss was so much focused on the giving of blood and not on other types of market. If the question was, I repeat, if the question is the issue of altruism, so that's why I think it's misleading to focus only on the issue of motivation, because Margaret Brading said, I mean, the world is full of vocational works. Why they are not, I mean, why we do not forbid the market in vocational works? They are paid. A nursery, doctors, they are typical vocational works. Why are they paid? Does this payment commodify their vocation? Of course, you might say this is different from the giving of blood, because, as you said before, the blood is part of your body. Okay, but think about the possibility that even the vocation is part of your body. If you are, I don't know, strong enough, and your vocation is to lift weights because you are kind of a Schwarzenegger, I'm joking, of course, but that is an endowment, it's a talent, it's something that you have received as a gift, and you are paid to do that. It's part of your body too, that strength, the muscles and whatever. So she's claiming, why, I mean, you have to focus on the blood. What's the difference between the blood and many other types of, you know, different kinds of markets? You see the point?
If you don't mind, I think as it is already a quarter to 8, unfortunately, we have to leave it there, specifically since the session is also being recorded.
Yeah.
So thank you so much, Paolo, for this wonderful talk, for this amazing discussion. Thank you so much, Pierre, for having stayed with us until this late. I really hope to have the opportunity to see you soon in person, Paolo.
Me too, yeah.
And Pierre, I also hope to see you soon again in Paris. So thank you again. So this was the very last session of this seminar this year, but I'll send you the next year's program in early September. So next year's seminar will start towards the end of September, and it will continue throughout the year. It was wonderful to listening to you, Paolo. Very, very insightful, raising so many profound philosophical, social, ethical, economic, and political issues. And so I hope to have the opportunity to listen to you again very soon.
Thank you so much, and thanks
Thank you.
for giving me the chance to be the last one. So big honor, big burden.
No, it was amazing. Really, your talk was exactly the sort of talk I would love to have in this seminar. I mean,
Great.
100%, literally 100% relevant, pertinent, to the point. So it was perfect. It was a perfect way of finishing this year's seminar.
Thank you.
Thank you. Have a nice
Goodbye.
evening. See you hopefully
Bye.
soon, both of you. Thank you. Goodbye.
Bye. Have you stopped the recording?
Yes. Yes, no, I haven't.